Now, time for our final how-to session into the world of theatre. But I'm sure the themes are relevant to lots more: event design, architecture, community design, theatre, and the wider cultural engagement. Zoe Angelou, Robinson is a creative producer currently at Headlong Theatre, leading on productions playing across the UK. Most recently, with The Barbican, co-producing a play for the living in a time of extinction by Miranda Rose Hall, a bold experiment in eco-theatre making which took the climate crisis head-on in process, content and form. Zoe, over to you.
Thanks so much, Alicia. Yeah, my name's Zoe Robinson, and I'm a theatre producer working in London at Headlong. So I'm going to be talking about reimagining UK theatre as a whole in the climate crisis. I'm going to talk you through what Headlong do, the type of shows we make and how we make them. I'm going to use the production that Alicia mentioned, a play for the living in a time of extinction, as a case study to talk you through how we essentially tried to unpick a lot of the traditional ways of theatre making and really hold a light up to ourselves and how we can do better. I'm going to talk through the challenges we had, which weren't always obvious, the learnings that we found, and how we can move forwards. And hopefully some of those things will speak to you and your industries and the way you work. It's worth saying that I feel like the theatre industry and the arts industries are still learning, maybe still in baby stages compared with some of the other industries at the moment in terms of how we reduce our carbon footprint. But the thing I know that I do and Headlong does is strive to make connections to our audiences wherever we go. And it is in this connection through storytelling, in the way that we encourage people to ask questions, to see things in a new way, both on stage and the people working on shows backstage, that really can inspire change. So when we're talking about theatre, I mean both in the way we physically make the shows, but also how we experience them and how that might change habits after we've seen a show. So Headlong, what type of work do we make? So I've been at Headlong nearly 2 years, and we have made 6 main stage productions in that time. I'm just going to take you through some of them. Karina by Chloe Moss was made with and at the Liverpool Everyman and Playhouse. It's a feminist thriller set on a cargo ship, grappling with themes of capitalism, and saw one female shipmate amongst her male counterparts. We presented Jitney by August Wilson. This was a co-production with Leeds Playhouse and the Old Vic in London, and it then went on tour. Jitney is one of August Wilson's 10 plays in a cycle he wrote, looking at Black experience in America in the 20th century. Henry V, I realise I haven't put who wrote Henry V. It is, of course, William Shakespeare, that we presented at the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse at the Globe, co-produced with them, and then we went on tour co-producing with Leeds Playhouse again and Royal and Derngate. The Sam Wanamaker is that beautiful space where everything is lit by candles. So that was a really interesting challenge for us in how we made that show. And the final example is actually one that's showing currently, which is A View from the Bridge, a classic by Arthur Miller. Chichester Festival Theatre and the Rose Kingston. So yeah, we present new writing and classics in a new way, again, to try and connect with audiences in new ways and ask new questions. So the reason I showed you those photos was not just to kind of say this is our work, but to also look for those similarities and how that plays into our relationship with climate change. So all of these productions, we always aim for a sleek design with high standards, that kind of real quality control. We aim to move both kind of emotionally through our work, but we are a touring company. We're a leading touring company in this country. So the sets have to be durable. They need to be made out of certain materials that can be pulled apart and then put back together, often very quickly. They need to be safe with team members running up and down things that have just been made on that day. We move as well. We travel around the country. So that travel itself and the way we tour is obviously going to have an impact on our carbon footprint. You will have heard the amount of co-producers I spoke about. So Headlong are a really small company, but we always co-produce with other venues. We don't have a venue ourselves. And so that relationship is quite key, because obviously we need to match the aims and the expectations of the co-producers we're working with and the environment that they're working in. And time, obviously, those productions and a couple more were made in 2 years. And that gives you a sense of kind of the lead-in time from the point when we go, this show is greenlit, to developing it, to designing it, to going into rehearsals, to making quick changes in a technical period. And those things, these things that I've just gone through, you might be seeing the common thread means that it is quite challenging when we come up against the obvious crisis we're in, because all of these things kind of shout, not necessarily making steps towards sustainability. And so we started thinking, what can we do in a big way to really challenge ourselves? And we decided to really focus, not that we were forgetting about it on other shows, but use one show, not to be prescriptive about it, but one show to really shout about what could be done and how we could do things differently. So we found this play, A Play for the Living in a Time of Extinction, which is by Miranda Rose Hall. And we read this play and thought, this is brilliant. This can be the play that is our that seed for this idea and how we're going to work differently. And as luck would have it, Katie Mitchell, the renowned director who has done so much in sustainable working, was working on this show from London, but working on a production in Switzerland. She was working on Zoom, directing a show, making this show in a sustainable way. And she was drawing on and furthering her work that she had done with a project called Sustainable Theatre. And she originally conceived this project with the support of French choreographer Jerome Bell and Theatre Vidi Lausanne in Switzerland. And we brought Katie in and said, look, do you want to do this work, and do you want to partner with us on this sort of work in the UK and in London? And with someone like Katie Mitchell on board, we had a meeting with the Barbican and we programmed a week of performances in the Barbican this spring. Now, to give you context again of that time, we had that meeting with the Barbican in summer 2021, and the production was on in summer 2022, and the production was on this year in spring 2023. So that gives you that kind of quite small amount of time to develop your ideas and make something that is that high quality, but also looking at how we're working sustainably. So what is this show, and why was it going to be the show that we used to shout about how we could make sustainable theatre? So the show itself is one performer called Naomi, who finds herself on stage without her other performers, and she ends up doing sort of part TED Talk, part stand-up comedy. It's a battle cry for how she's experienced the climate crisis, and she ends up turning the show into an off-grid show to really show her relationship with the climate crisis. Now, it is a one-person show, but we needed quite a lot of other people, because at that point, around 10, the show itself goes off-grid. Sorry if I'm rushing through this, but this is kind of where it gets exciting, or definitely for me when I was experiencing the way that this worked really exciting. So 10, 20 minutes in, she says, this show is going off grid, and all the lights in the theatre go off. And you hear, as an audience member, this whir of bikes. And slowly the lights come on, and you see 10 cyclists powering all the energy you need, all the lighting, all the sound for the rest of the show. And why that, I realised, and I think I hadn't actually realised until I was actually on one of the bikes during one of the rehearsals, and why that was so important is because the audience are literally seeing the sweat, the effort, the labor of what it takes to power a show like this on the Barbican main stage. And the cyclists at the Barbican were all staff members at the Barbican, all volunteering, and you found yourself sort of watching them during the show and thinking, you know, they're putting so much energy into this, and that became part of the drama. And that bike technology was made by an incredible company called Electric Pedals down in South London. So to give you a sense of what the whole set looked like, you can see there that, I suppose for a Barbican main stage, so quite pared back, but still quite arresting and really effective in terms of what you're looking at. So you can see 10 cyclists on bikes fanning out, lead performer in the middle, BSL interpreter signing to the side of her, stage left of her, and LED flex neon lights, giving pretty much all the lights, apart from a couple of others, to the stage in a circuit shape to represent that circuit. So those two counters at the top that you can see with 393 and 326, that is the wattage counters, so how much each side of 5 bikes are making in any one moment. And we had actually predicted that each side of the bikes, each person would make between 50 and 60 watts at any given time. But you can see there, just by doing the maths, that they were making a bit more, and actually some of them really went for it at the end of the show. Now, obviously, how much power we had to make the show really changed the design and what we were playing with. So I've got a stat here. So usually at the Barbican, a play consumes 80,000 watts for lighting and 30,000 watts for sound. And for this show, we planned to not go above 500 watts, because that's what we had estimated, that 50 watts per bike that everyone could make. So just sort of like let that settle, that amount of watts would normally be what you'd see on the Barbican main stage in a West End theatre. And we were trying to make a show as gripping with those amounts, that amount of energy. And I think it was a really exciting challenge, and the way we worked had to really, really shift. So those two things, the show itself and the way the show was powered, were obviously really connecting to the audience. But how did we shift what we were doing, I suppose, sort of backstage and in the making of it? Now, we by no means, Headlong, are the first to work on any of this. Obviously, Katie Mitchell has done years on this sort of work, but also organisations like Julie's Bicycle, and more recently Theatre Green Book, which is an initiative, a roadmap created by Paddy Dillon and some other experts across the country on how theatre makers, theatre companies, theatre venues can work in a structured way to build up how sustainable their productions are. And this is a lot of information. I can send it round to anyone who's interested, but this is kind of the cheat sheet I have on the wall, and it's divided into 3: baseline, intermediate, and advanced. And those are the 3 kind of aims you could be really looking for each of your shows. And it breaks it down into the invitation to make the show, production, making, and how you close the show. But simply put, the making parameters is what we really focused on for this. And for that, it is, where does all of your materials come from the socks that some of those cyclists are wearing, to that LED flex we were using, to the steel deck, and where does all those things go at the end of the show? And when you break it down like that, it felt like that we had real clear parameters for all of our design teams. So those 3 guideline kind of breakdowns in the Theatre Green Book. Baseline: if your show has 50% of materials that have had a previous life and 65% which have a future life, you're gonna be on that baseline level. Intermediate: 75% of your materials have a previous life, 80% have a future life, and advanced: 100% and 100%. Now, we obviously aimed for 100% on this with how we were making the show. Theatre can often become very crunchy at the point of you're in tech, you're in a dark theatre, you suddenly realise you need something, and you would always often go to ordering it quickly online, someone running out to a shop. And this happened with actually some of our lighting equipment, that we needed an adapter in a really key moment to make all the lights work, and we did actually have to buy that new. So I think our percentages in the end were around 98% and 100%. But I was so amazed that we could get sort of percentages when previously we were probably at that baseline, if not lower, with our shows. So that's how we made the show at the Barbican. But we are a touring theatre company, and we actually know that at least 50% of our carbon footprint on a show goes towards travel, moving people, moving sets around the country. I haven't done an international tour, but Headlong do, and so that would mean moving around the world. Now, we wanted to build this model based on our standard touring model. So venues that we work with, we would go to them for a week, they would play this show. But how would that work in this context? Now, Katie Mitchell had worked on a tour in Europe when she was at Vidi, where nothing moves. So what does that mean? So that means she made the show. Obviously, she was Zooming as director from London, creating this show. They made the show in Switzerland. And then other European playhouses picked up on the idea, and they would find a director locally, a cast member locally, their stage management, their creative team, and they were sent digitally guidelines on how to make that bike power. And so that was happening in Europe. But we realized quite quickly that that couldn't happen here in the UK. We have lots of relationships with touring venues here, and we know that they are on their knees in terms of resources and capacity. So we're sort of stretched, especially since COVID. We don't have the resources, the capacity, and the time to make that happen in the same way. So how could Headlong help to curate something where we would still be in touch and still engaging in the same way that we would on a standard tour, but on this? So what would that mean for us? So that meant that we would help a touring venue to find an actor, contract with them, a director, cyclist, there's a choir at the end of the show, a stage manager, their creative team. We wanted there to be a shared DNA, a shared aesthetic. So it seemed like a tour that we would normally send on the road. So we had lead designers in each department. So the design team from London at the Barbican, so the set and costume designer, the lighting designer, the sound designer became lead designers to give advice to the teams running it on the ground in different places across the UK. We made our touring production manager, made a set of touring guidelines, which were updated, kept live on a simple Google Drive document that as we learnt things, we added things to them. We held so many Zoom meetings, some more successful than others, parameter meetings, what they were aiming for, what their concerns were. We had full team meetings with all of the production managers so they could share their learnings, they could share what their concerns were. We had lots of design meetings and all over Zoom. And I think it meant that we could have a lot more of them. But like I say, I think it's not necessarily... we found that it wasn't necessarily the best thing to do to kind of give so many people lots of information, which they then had to digest. We kind of were learning as we went about kind of what to throw at these different venues. Now, time was really important on this, because if you think on a normal standard tour for us, we're trying to fit a venue, Leeds Playhouse, Bolton Octagon, Rose Kingston in exactly week to week, so we're not having to pay actors in those in-between weeks. But on this, we could spread it out a bit more. We could have the Barbican a couple of weeks, another touring venue a couple of weeks, another venue. So this worked on one hand, but I suppose on the other hand, there wasn't that constant kind of like enthusiasm. The tour wasn't constantly running, which actually we really felt for the first time. And it's important to say that a major change was that we did have to send around 2 flight cases, or 1 flight case and a pallet box, because like I was saying, that kind of resource and that capacity to make that bike technology, the production managers in this country, if a venue has a production manager, didn't have that time. So we sent around 4 bike rear wheels, because the touring venues had 4 bikes, a power box, a generator, a wattage counter, and that was sent around the country in an eco van. So that's the kind of parameters for the tour. Where did we go? So we went to Belgrade Theatre, Coventry. So you can kind of see those 4 bikes there, their take on the design. They've still got that circuit. Can't quite see wattage counter in red. It's just hidden by that light. So you can see how they realised it. We then went to Shakespeare North, which I'm afraid I don't have a photo of. We then played at New Vic Theatre in Stoke, which was so interesting because this was in the round. So you can see the playing space in the middle, 4 bikes around it. There is a projection screen. So actually in Belgrade Coventry, they projected onto the back wall there. And then New Vic Stoke, they came up with this amazing idea to project upwards into that screen you can see at the top of our screen there. We played at the Drum in Plymouth, which I don't have a production shot from. And then we ended, and I'm sorry, this is a bit blurry because these were actually taken by photos on Teams of the Ground. This is York Theatre Royal, and you can see the choir actually there. So that shared aesthetic is there. You've got the connection, that circuit of light. You've got those bikes in that fan. You've got that same colour palette of costumes there. So what are our challenges and learnings on this? So the design, we were having to map the wattage. If your lights had a big flash, you were having to think about where your sound levels were, what your speakers were at. You can see how we had to shrink and expand for each of the different spaces. And I think interestingly, on a more kind of zoomed out note, we realized that shared DNA was kind of a constant conversation point for us, because a designer holds that authority, and by having a lead designer but then somebody trying to lead on the ground meant there was sort of what was in it for the designers on the ground creatively if they were given these like really strict parameters. And so there was always that back and forth on kind of like how much did we want to give that freedom to the local teams, and how much did we want to hold that that sort of through line across all shows. So you can see here the model box from the Barbican on the left with the 10 bikes, and then you can see what we were sending out to the touring venues and how they could set up their venues. Marketing, selling a show. Marketing teams are always on me. They're always saying, have you got your cast member in? We're always late with that. Obviously, on this, we cast brilliant Lydia West in the role of Naomi at the Barbican, but we couldn't use her face on tour because that would be false advertising. So we had to make new design images. Well, it wasn't really a problem, but it meant that we were kind of doing more than we would normally have to do on that front. Print, material print. We sort of thought it didn't make sense in the context of the way we were working to ask venues to print flyers, print posters. But actually, some of the feedback we got was that venues really relied on that. And I think if we had had more in-depth conversations around marketing this show and how we spoke about this show and how we made marketing for this show earlier on, that would have helped. What do people want from the show? We were so excited to see the show and work on this show, but I think Katie Mitchell told me that in a conference she was at, they'd surveyed the audience members, and 98% of them said that they wanted to ensure theatre companies were working sustainably and making work sustainably, but only 7% of them wanted to see a show about sustainability and climate change. And that was a real kind of light bulb moment for me, because I thought, well, we've made this show about climate change. And actually, does everyone want to see that when maybe they want to have more escapism in theatre? But what we did lean on is stories with the cyclists. Cyclists were from the local community, even staff from the venue. And that was a really exciting thing, that these were people who'd never performed on stage and suddenly were powering a whole stage. So we really focused in on that. And that was something that audiences really connected to. And finally, on challenges and learning, getting the team together. Usually we'd have one director, one designer, one creative team, one set of cast. But suddenly we were casting for 6 venues. We were bringing in teams for 6 venues. And there was a really interesting thing with the choir. So there's a choir at the end of the show that come on for a song. And we wanted to ensure that that was made up of diverse people, different backgrounds, because our lead actor was of global majority, and we wanted that to kind of reflect in the choir and everyone on stage. So we put that as a parameter, need to have a diverse choir. Now, obviously, outside big cities, outside London, that suddenly became harder. One of our other parameters was, don't use your car to get to the theatre, or think about the way you're travelling. Again, different outside London. So we had to, be more flexible in the way we were designing the very team that we were putting together. Sorry, I realise I'm racing through. But the final thing I would say is, in terms of how we're moving forwards, I'm very aware in making this show that the way we track our carbon footprint, it has to be more than just the making, because obviously audiences are coming to the theatre, they're driving in their cars, they're going out for dinner. So how are we changing what they're thinking through the theatre that we're making? And could we and will we track the whole carbon footprint of what it is to make theatre? We're sparking conversation, and that's what I think is so important. Theatre and art for me is about, again, how do you get people to ask questions of themselves, of other people? And that is what I want to continue doing with shows that we make. And I think in terms of shows that we produce next year, the final thing I'll say is that originally, I think we thought we were fighting against this model of making shiny theatre, those beautiful sets. But actually what we were fighting against is making the show look exactly the same every night. And I realized that that's what Netflix does, but we're in the realm of live theatre. It can be different every night. It can be slightly different at each venue. And I think when we really leaned into that liveness, that's what really kind of opened so many doors for us. Thank you so much for coming and listening to this talk. Alicia, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. Thank you so much. That was so fascinating, especially like learning more about the bikes as well in that production. So question is from Joe. Was there any sound design or music that had to be considered, e.g. powering sound systems or methods of creating sound?
Yeah, so we had a brilliant sound designer called Paul Clark, who had worked with Katie Mitchell lots before. And he actually, his whole sound design, all the sounds you heard in the show were made from people cycling bikes. They were made from humans and bikes, which was really interesting. And then he wrote the song at the end. And definitely, yeah, we had to have all of that thought about how the sound system was powered up. And I didn't say, but actually our two operators needed to be on stage, because you lose power the longer your cabling is. So normally you'd have an operator back behind the audience in a theatre, but you had them on stage powering and operating that sound on stage.
Another question is more to do with even like collaborations. How do you even get that coming about? How do you communicate to different designers? And I think you also touched on the duration of how long it takes, and it's quite small. What kind of mechanisms or methodologies do you use to kind of maybe improve that or to refine it?
So I think it's about conversation, the way we initially have that kind of invitation to work with designers, that we say we're a company that are really trying to focus on this. And I'm definitely learning how to be clear in that sense. I think I'm finding we have lots of meetings with co-producers and we say, we're trying to work sustainably. And everyone goes, yeah, because there's the passion there. But I think I see my job as breaking that down. What does that actually mean week to week, process to process, time frame? In rehearsals, what are we doing? In tech week, what are we doing? And I think it's about support. Time is both short as a whole, but also in very quick decisions have to be made. And how can we speak through them and think about how can we make them sustainably? And it is a real push and pull, because obviously if you want something to look a certain way, quite often that means buying something new. But giving more time to a designer means that they have more time to think through other possibilities. The Theatre Green Book have a really interesting thing. So in theatre, you do a white card meeting when initial designs are made, and then a final design. And Theatre Green Book have encouraged everyone to do a green card meeting, which is where everyone comes together to talk about their aims when it comes to sustainability. And I think that's really important. And we're definitely trying to do that across all of our shows now.
Brilliant. So thank you so much, Zoe. I honestly didn't realize it took all this kind of material and then also energy, especially when it came to like learning about the sound and the lights and the watts behind it into a production. So yeah, it's very, very urgent to kind of be able to redesign these kind of elements as well. So that's it for our practical how-tos. What a lot of learning across 2 days. Feels like I've been in a boot camp for an entire week. We certainly need education to change. And so for our final session, we've gathered educators from across the globe to have a conversation about exactly that. Click onto the next how-to session and see you there. But if that's not your bag, then switch over to the main stage for our final big hitting conversation of the festival, where you'll see Sarah Wigglesworth and Ehab Sayed talking with Deborah Nagan about how buildings can conserve and create energy. Thank you so much.